Good. Question number 4 today. It's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever answered me. How can I find somebody to mentor me? Just to zoom out, I think it's a really important biblical principle to be mentored. I think there is, I have an online ministry school. Possibly you're watching this video in that context, and I believe in those things. Those things are great, and yet part of the problem, I think, in the church in the West is we've very much taken that kind of Greek lecture hall idea of how we'll educate people. That we'll have somebody at the front of a class giving a lecture and people take notes and learn that way. And of course, the biblical way of learning is much more, as you would see in a Jewish culture, of like an apprentice with a master, or a mentor with a mentee, a Paul with a Timothy, a Jesus with the disciples, an Elijah with an Elisha. I can go on, and a Moses with the Joshua. So I think God has people for every single one of us who he wants them to mentor us. So a few quick thoughts on that. Number one, if you're asking this question, you're on the right track. God has people he wants to be voices in your life. Number two, I think it's really important, and it behooves us to think this through. We actually need to have a good framework for what it means to be mentored by somebody, and we need to set up a permission framework around that. There are quite a few people I mentor in my life, but there are a lot of people I see who need mentoring, but I will never try and mentor somebody until that framework is set up around them. By that, I mean, I just don't simply go to people and try to give them random advice. If you look at some of those social media, especially some of those old tired platforms like Facebook, sorry if you're watching on Facebook, but it's filled with people trying to give advice to other people. I know people who literally spend the whole day reposting little things, and it's kind of like, hey, I'm going to give you some advice on how to live your life. And great, how's that working? So my point is, I think we've actually got to enter into a relationship where we've defined, hey, I have permission to speak into your life on this area, on this key, and you will listen. And there's a humility thing about learning. There's a humility thing in a mentee. One is being mentored, where we're going to somebody and we're actually saying, hey, you know more about this than me, and I am willing to learn. If I wanted to learn about car repair or plumbing or something like that, I'm going to go to somebody and literally say, I'm actually quite good at knowing what I don't know. So I would go to somebody and say, I have no clue. Treat me like an idiot. I want to learn. I'm not stupid. I'm just ignorant in these areas, and I really want to learn. And what I see happen quite often in this thing about being mentored, and it's, I feel maybe it's always been the case, but I feel this is getting worse, and some of our kind of internet generation makes this. I think there are a lot of people who are either younger or they're inexperienced in some areas. And in a way, they want to move forward, but whenever somebody says something they don't like, they want to argue, and they want to turn like a mentoring relationship into a debate relationship, and that's never going to work. So how do you find that person to mentor? Number one, realize you need this. Number two, if God leads you into that person, have that conversation. Go to them and say, hey, I'd like you to be a voice in my life. Maybe we can have a coffee once a week, and I want to give you permission to speak into what I'm doing. There are churches, I have a group of churches when I travel in ministry, that I go to, and where the pastor or the eldership of a church has actually come to me and said, Graham, we want you to come as a guest speaker, but more than that, we actually want you to be a voice in the life of this church. And if you see something, we give you permission to take us aside and share what you're hearing from God or what you see here. And we want you to know you have that permission. And that's a really useful thing, because as a guest in somebody else's house, I'm not going to cross those lines without invitation. So we need to invite somebody into that. Let me finish with this, and it's actually the crux of the question. How do we find those people? Key number one, I think you've actually probably got them already in your life, because God tends to work all things together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. So you probably already have them, and you actually sometimes need to pray, God, would you open my eyes and show me the people that I already have? And that you just need to go and have that permission, invitation, conversation with them. Number two, pray. Pray. Be praying and say, Lord, would you lead people into my life who can mentor me at a certain level? Quick thought on this as well. Some of the problem is we often want to try to find one person who's going to mentor us on everything and be this like guru in our life. And Jesus is your guru. That's a bad expression. He's your savior. He's your Lord. He doesn't want, and at times God will have, as it were, the plumber come in and mentor you about plumbing, but that guy knows nothing about web design or about relationships or counseling or finances or whatever. And at times we've got to learn to look at mentoring relationships and say, on what basis, on what subject, on what speciality? I have about 5 people God sent into my life to really teach me about finances, about investing, about how to do fundraising, and it's such a blessing to me. But some of those people are clueless about other things that I am strong in, and I have some reciprocal things where some people mentor me on certain things and I mentor them on some other things, and there's a dual reciprocal thing going on there. So I would say recognize the people that are already around and ask them. Pray and ask God to bring those people in. Lastly, here's a little zany kind of thought as well. You can be mentored by a book. You can be mentored by a cassette tape. It's my age. There's probably one of the biggest voices in my life is a guy I never met. My parents met him. Somebody gave me some cassette tapes of this guy in the 80s and absolutely changed my life. I would probably pay thousands of dollars for more of these cassette tapes. I have about 100 messages by this guy now. And one of the most amazing men of God, but I've never met him. But I have learned and been mentored by his cassettes, MP3s now, and books. And you can be mentored by spending time with a book, with a tape, with a, at a conference, by things like that. It's great to have personal interaction, but you can also receive in that way. So I hope that helps in that sense.